Okay, we are now officially live on Facebook. Welcome to Monday Meets. Monday Meets is the Willow's ongoing virtual series where we take a look at agency staff, agency programs, and things that are of interest to the Willow and about domestic violence. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. All of October, we've been doing a series of activities throughout the month, and we'll continue to do so. We've got upcoming a candlelight vigil, and we've got an art show online, a gallery of survivor art, as well as a couple of art shows live in Jefferson and Franklin County. So there's still a whole bunch of stuff to catch. We've had some proclamations with Douglas, Franklin, and Jefferson County proclaiming it Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So it's been a great one so far. We would love for you to join in with us in any of our activities. If you'd like a purple ribbon, we have them available. You can just let us know. If you'd like, we also have a number of children's art kits as part of the art gallery displays. So if you would like a child's art kit, which has supplies in it to make their own mask in support survivors, and you can do that as well. We can get one out to you. Just let us know. You can email me at the comments link. I'll put my email in on the comments below. But today's Monday Meets is a little bit different. We don't have a staff member. I'm actually very excited to announce that we've got Topeka Mayor Michelle de la Isla with us today. She's going to talk to us a little bit about the work that's being done in Topeka, particularly with the mayoral domestic violence task force there, which is very exciting. And Michelle has a history, a personal history with DV, being a survivor herself, and I'm hoping she'll kind of discuss that a little bit with us. But without any further, Michelle, if you want to throw the camera on, we'll do the big reveal. There we go. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and just one more quick note. I got to Columbo myself here. If you do have a question while you're watching and you want to ask Michelle something, throw it in the Facebook comments. I am watching the Facebook comments at the same time, multitasking, and I'll be sure to make sure that we get those to her. But it is great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
We're in the middle of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I'm sure you know October is DVAM each year, and so this is a really great addition to have you here kind of talk about what's going on in Topeka, because I remember sort of reading about the task force a number of years ago and being very interested in kind of how that worked and what was going on with it. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that today and a little bit about your story. Can we just kind of get started with, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you made your rise to mayor of Topeka?
So that was interesting. It's not something that I was looking for. It kind of found me. I'm not your typical mayoral candidate. I've been a statistic waiting to happen, and I'm very grateful that I wasn't. But I've been homeless. I am a single mom of 3 kids. And in addition to that, I have been working in our community in the nonprofit sector and as a volunteer for a long time. And that's how I ended up getting connected with resources that were helping me, find a place as a volunteer and as an advocate in the community. Started doing downtown revitalization projects with a whole bunch of amazing people that were very invested in it, taught me a lot of things. And finally, when it was one of the girls that we were mentoring through the Mana de Topeka program, through the Hermanitas program, and we ended up getting the money after years of trying, understanding that was not the main reason, but it was one of the big reasons. I felt like there was more to do, and I decided to run for office. So pretty interesting stuff, especially with my background, because as you can imagine, a lot of individuals like me who are survivors of domestic violence don't think that, this is one of their arenas. And I had nothing but support. So very grateful for that and the support that I received from the YWCA.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for kind of telling us about that path. As I have to fanboy a little bit here. I worked on your candidacy as a volunteer, and I've always been hugely impressed by the candidness with which you speak about it, and I really appreciate that. I think so much of DV gets kind of tucked away in silence, and so it's really nice when when we talk about it openly and kind of address it as a public health concern.
We need to eliminate the stigma. The reality is that there's this really big misconception that domestic violence only occurs in low-income families and, people that have problems. The reality is that the individual that you may think is the most well put together and kindest person could be either a batterer or could be being battered at home. I mean, and the reality is that we need to acknowledge that it can happen anywhere. And that there's resources and that we should not stay silent. So that's one of the main reasons that I'm so outspoken about it. We need to, eliminate the stigma and have people talk about it.
Okay, we covered this next question just a little bit with that, but I kind of want to dig a little deeper here. Do you feel like your experience as a survivor has sort of directly shaped the way in which you go about implementing policies surrounding it, or thinking about policies surrounding DV?
I think so, in the sense that I have a very unique perspective that, especially when working with our partners in law enforcement and talking with our partners in the DA's office, that, by the way, in Topeka, they've been nothing but collaborative. It's interesting to see the misconceptions of what survivors are going through and why they stay in these relationships for so long before they're actually able to say something. I mean, like, I can tell you in my case, I was only making $35,000 a year. We had 2 houses and the kids. And I was being told that if, at certain points, I was being told that the kids were going to be taken to Mexico if I did anything. So a lot of people don't understand the psychology behind it. So when I have the opportunity to speak with individuals that are jaded by what they're seeing without understanding, because compassion fatigue is a thing, it really helps people then have a different perspective. So I think that that's the part that has been really powerful, which is being able for practitioners that may have some compassion fatigue to have somebody that has been through it, overcome it, and then been able to say, and by the way, you may see me all put together right now, but this is where I was at, and this is how it happened, and I was your typical person in that situation. So that I think has been the most powerful thing of having survived this issue.
Yeah, I think that's really really important, because compassion fatigue is such a factor. It even affects folks in advocacy, and you just have to always bear in mind that regardless of whether this may be your 50th or 100th person in this situation that you've dealt with, it's always that person's first time in that situation, and they're trying their best. And so I think that's really awesome that you can kind of pass that perspective along to folks who are dealing with this on a regular basis, especially since, as we know, domestic violence calls can be some of the most potentially dangerous for officers.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the origin and the purpose of the task force. Can you kind of fill us in on how that became a thing and what it sort of does and how it works?
So the task force already was in existence, and it was kind of cool that when I became elected, the YWCA said, hey, we would love to have you, be part of the task force and help, bring together the partners into the task force so that we can start really making some significant change, because we know that this is something that really matters to you. And the result has been phenomenal. We have been able to bring in partners from Stormont Vale, partners from, the batterer intervention programs, from the rescue mission, from the police department, the DA's department. And we've all started talking about the values that surround the issue and just changing the conversation a little bit. Also, the sheriff's department was participating. And of course, the YWCA, and just talking about the value statements, talking about what are the barriers for us to be able to just help our police officers and our first responders that are trying to see this and are seeing it over and over again. We all know the addresses. We all know when we get that call from that address, we know exactly what's happening. And individuals reticent, like the lack of interest in actually disclosing or reporting. Then we started talking about how do we start putting in practice some things that have worked, best practices that have worked in different places. So like one of the things that Michelle McCormick was genius about was that she knew about this assessment that you could provide, and it's a lethality assessment, so that the individual, that the offended who had been perpetrated on, understood the level of danger that they were in. And one of the things that, took me aback with that lethality assessment is the fact that if somebody would have told me in the first or second times that my life was going to be in danger, I think that I probably would have taken action a little bit earlier. But, it's interesting that so many times we don't recognize it, because when you're in the middle of the trauma, you normalize things.
Right.
So just like little things like that. So the purpose really is a think tank convening, making sure that every stakeholder is in constant communication, and that we are not pushing, but discussing what are the best policies and practices that will work in our community, and how we could be working together. And that way we have faces to the name. So all of a sudden, if Michelle is the one, well, she's not there anymore, it's Becca Spielman now. But if Becca were to pick up the phone, she knows exactly that she's going to talk to Mani, or she's going to talk to this individual, or, who the person is that's going to be on the other side that has the understanding before they send somebody else out.
That's really fascinating. I am curious because, obviously confidentiality for us as advocates is such an important part of what we do. Do you all stick to more of a sort of general talking about how we coordinate things like these lethality assessments and other
Yes,
sort of
we don't talk
things?
we don't talk about specific cases. We talk about in general. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. That's one we've had a couple of community coordinated response teams, and one barrier that we inevitably end up getting into is if we talking about specific cases gets very, you don't want to break anybody's confidentiality, so that's often been kind of a hurdle. Which sort of leads me into my next question, and this one, you stated earlier that the DA's office has been wonderful to work with, and that is amazing. I find from an advocate's position, and being part of a domestic violence agency, that sometimes there are situations in which our goals as advocates are not the same as the court's goals, or not the same as law enforcement's goals. And I was just wondering how you had dealt with those kinds of situations when they come up in the task force.
I think it's all of us being together on the table and developing a relationship of trust. I mean, because the reality is, it's kind of interesting. We call that, when you're working with the collaborative daisy, which is every single person has their own pedal that pulls them back into their own specific mission. But in the end, we want to pull them back into the center of the flower, which is where the joint mission is at. And how do you keep everybody centered on the mission? And sorry, everybody, I have my dog that I'm petting on the side. My cat is on my lap. Welcome to my house. I think that what's been very helpful is that development of relationship, so that everybody understands what the core mission is that we're trying to accomplish together. And not only that, I think that one of the things that we have lost in society is the ability to understand somebody else. So if there is a barrier in the DA's office, or if there is a barrier at the police department, if there is such a thing, being able to come with the understanding that we're going to listen to what the barrier is without, interrupting you with my solutions, because I have to understand that a lot of the problems are not just technical problems, they're adaptive problems that have a whole culture behind it. So the more that you dig in to understand, the more that you can figure out, okay, if this doesn't work, then where do we go? And I think that that's the balance that we have been able to strike. We're not always going to agree 100%. The role of law enforcement is very different than the role of the YWCA. The law of the DA's office is a very different role than it is for law enforcement. Everybody is connected, but everybody has a very different role. And it's that magic of really understanding everybody's role, so that then we can figure out how we can come together.
Great. I appreciate that so much. And if I could just maybe bounce off script just a little bit here, one of the things that I've been kind of thinking through is this new legislation in like California and Hawaii that has passed, which addresses coercive control. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this legislation, but right now we tend to enforce simply the physical abuse side of things once it gets to a physical altercation. But coercive control legislation starts to look at those patterns of power and control, the psychological,
Controlling somebody's
financial,
money, you cannot go
yeah,
here.
and it's been kind of an interesting. There's been some interesting debates around it because it does get to a little bit of this. How do you support someone with enforcement versus how do you support someone with services? And can you actually make someone's life accidentally a little more difficult through enforcement or over legislating the problem, but when you're trying to help? And I just think that's a really kind of interesting place.
I am always a fan of trying to empower the individual in the situation to understand the gravity and severity of the situation. One of the things that you know very well is that in the state of Kansas, once there is a report of domestic violence, it's not up to the victim, to the offended, to make the report. The state automatically then takes over. So at least we have that if there is, like gross evidence of harm in this state. But I think that as we start exploring policies, I think that this is where the task force was. We are very fortunate to have Marlu Wagner, who decided that she was going to branch off and create a partnership of businesses to understand domestic violence and then start creating systems of education. I think that this is where the whole community has to come together and understand what's happening so that then the individuals that are being offended upon are able to then understand that this is a pattern. The problem is that many times you get into a tricky space because what if the couple decided that one of the partners was going to be doing the finances? You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
I mean, and there may be no nefarious intent, but you have to be able to listen in very closely to understand, I can't go here because my partner is saying that, I can't go, or, so it gets into this really tricky area of understanding. Now, if you have a clear cut, I can't go places because my partner does not let me, it's a different story. But you and I understand all too well that that's not the way that it ever materializes. So those legislations concern me because there's so much nuance into it that I agree. I mean, it shouldn't have to escalate to the point of somebody getting beat up. But then how do we define things so that they're clear cut and you're able to provide grace? Because there's so much gray in this.
Yeah, and that was I'm glad you said that, because that was my concern with it, particularly for sort of our underserved and marginalized populations, where there could be situations in which if one partner is arrested, it could create a significant financial harm on the family and even result in additional action or like kids being taken away. And so it's like, it seems that there's a danger of it being a little bit of over legislation, but at the same time, so nice to see them address that side of things.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit of a what if, but if you were able to legislate, or promote legislation for Kansas or for the country around domestic violence, what do you feel kind of would be the most important angles to look at, or what would you kind of propose as potential solutions as a public health issue?
So as a public health issue, I think that one of the biggest issues is being able to find ways of providing resources for the individuals that have dealt with the issue. Because I can tell you that for me, it was extremely difficult to leave the house. How was I going to explain to the kids that we were leaving the house that they were in? You know what I'm saying? Even though we have shelters, I think that there has to be a lot more training. Even though we think that we understand, I'm here, I show up, there's been violence, I'm just going to do my thing. But the other thing is figuring out ways that we could really fortify those PFAs. They're a piece of paper, and you and I know that, and it's horrific because you can have a PFA, but having a PFA does not mean that the individuals are actually following through with the PFA, because you don't have a police officer that can just, watch your behavior and, follow you. So I think that there would be a lot more conversation about understanding PFAs and how to fortify them both, and then figuring out, not so much with legislation, what resources we could develop a bank of. with support from the community for individuals that are trying to get out of a really bad situation, and training for, anybody that's either going into law enforcement or going into the law. I am a huge supporter of holistic, prosecutor offices, so that we really just go and understand what are the real issues that are leading to some of the behaviors. Because you and I know all too well, domestic violence is nothing but a symptom of something greater. And how do we legislate in a smart way that is compassionate for the human beings? So those are some of my initial thoughts. I don't have like one like immediate, but those are things that really concern me and keep me up at night.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's all really fantastic and important stuff. I would love to see, as we move forward, more emphasis on building innovative partnerships between some of these organizations. We've got some fun partnerships here that allow us to remove barriers, like we have the ability to foster animals for survivors, because a survivor who's in an abusive relationship where there's an animal involved is 8 times more likely to stay. And as if on cue, he jumps up.
This is Willow Domestic.
Yeah, I did have a question come through, which from a staff member on text. She said we have to know what the names of your pets are. So Bilbo Baggins, I know, which I love. So
Bilbo Baggins and Major Purrington.
Major Purrington. Okay, awesome, perfect.
And as you can tell, he's very abused.
Yeah, he's got a rough life there. I can definitely tell. He's hating every moment of that. But yeah, and we're also able with a partnership with the homeowners to offer a domestic violence transitional housing program with affordable rental for 1 to 2 year leases, which really helps with that barrier of financial
yes.
abuse. So,
but you see, but it would be wonderful if there would be legislation that has an allocation for our communities to understand, A, what the size of the problem is in your community, and B, what the level of support you need to have. I mean, it's a public health issue, but a lot of times, when you're in the throes of it all, there's so many considerations that people don't think about. And you're right, it would be great to have that conversation. It's like, what do we need to do to really just deal with this issue? And of course, we need to have more support for batterer intervention programs, because, I mean, when you learn about the stories of the batterers, I mean, sometimes there's mental illness. It's not always mental illness. I don't want there to be a stigma on this. But a lot of times it's learned behavior. And individuals that need to understand how to break a pattern of life that they have been taught since they were little. So I think that it's important for us to talk about both sides of the equation.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. I guess again, I'm going to go a little off book here, but what since we're looking at it as more of a public issue, if there are folks who are in a similar situation, involved in an abusive situation, you talked about the idea that we minimize things a little bit. But kind of riffing off that a bit, what advice would you give to someone if they were in a situation like this, or if they know someone who may be in a situation like this? What would your advice be?
My advice would be get help. There is help. We have your center in Lawrence. We have YWCA here in Topeka. Talk to somebody in your HR department that may have some resources. And if you do know somebody that you're, and we all know, the person that is really quiet, that all of a sudden in the middle of summer is wearing a turtleneck or long sleeves, and all of a sudden the person that radically changes their behavior at work, or one of your friends that, all of a sudden used to be the life of the party, and next thing you know, they started to date this person and they're not talking to you as much, and all of a sudden they're not going out. Just bring up the subject. Say, hey, I'm just noticing that there's something going on. There is no judgment here. I just want to let you know that I'm noticing this change and that it's safe for you to talk with me. And just let people know that it's safe to talk, and that you'll respect their decision, but that at least you want to educate them with regards to the situation that they may be in.
Well, I think that is excellent. And if anybody needs to contact us with any additional questions, the number is 785-843-3333. We have a 24-hour hotline. We have someone always available to take your calls who is trained and able to talk to you. Even if you don't have are not involved in an abusive situation, but you may have questions about what we talked about here, they can help you out. Before we go, since it's Monday Meets and it's kind of an informal chat thing, I do like to have a little shout out ending. So if there's anybody or anyone or anything that you've got going on that you'd like to shout out, here is an open forum to kind of do that.
Seriously, a shout out to all of the individuals that work in this domestic violence arena. You're angels. I know that it's a really hard job. You see some really horrible things, and it makes you question your belief in humanity. But the reality is that all of us are human. None of us are perfect. We're all broken. And we all need people like you who are willing to step up and, be supportive, be kind, be gentle, and be present in these times that are so difficult. So thank you all who are doing this work. I am so grateful for you. And if you don't think sometimes, I don't know what the end result is going to be, and I don't know if there's hope, you know what? Just remember, there is a mayor in a city that would have never been able to do it had she not had support. So thank you guys for what you do.
Well, thank you, Michelle. We really appreciate your time, as well as the time of Bilbo and Mr. Furrington. I know it's your most precious commodity, and I appreciate your taking some time to be with us today. If you have any more questions for Michelle or myself, and you didn't feel comfortable asking them online, I will post my email with the YouTube video, and you can feel free to email me. And if it's a question from Michelle, I'll make sure we get that answered for you. But thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Please take a moment to check out the rest of our Domestic Violence Awareness Month activities at the Willow. It's willowdvcenter.org/DVAM 2021. I'll throw that in the comments as well. Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a great one. Bye.